I'll talk about that in a little bit. It goes back to the discussion about changing Orange County's charter. A lot of communities are afraid to address tree protection on established single-family home lots because in the southeast, private property rights are very, very strong. So many communities, although they recognize, you know, the value of trees to the whole urban ecosystem, to tell someone, a homeowner, you cannot remove this tree without paying a fine or without replacing it, many communities are not willing to go that step. They'll look at new development and say, if you're removing these trees, then you have to replace them with other trees, and we have landscape standards. A lot of the education about proper tree care is misinformed, like the crepe myrtles that you see that are just, you know, there's no science to support the reasons that people think they have to do that to their crepe myrtle trees. Doing that shortens the life of the tree, shortens the flowering cycle, promotes decay, is ugly, you know, takes away from the aesthetics. And I think the hurricane issue with larger trees is the same. People think if it's shorter, it's going to be safer. But what happens when you hat rack a tree is instead of one branch, now you have 6 or 8. These all flush out with leaf area because the tree's lost a way to manufacture food, so it puts out a lot of leaves right away. These are very weakly attached, so the tree's going to grow taller and bushier than it was before and actually be more susceptible to wind damage. So some of it is just trying to get people to listen to the science and realize that if a tree's properly taken care of, it will do better than a tree that, you know, a live oak that's been hat racked isn't, you've taken away all the advantages of that native tree, the way it grows, the way it's able to anchor itself and be fairly wind hardy. So I'll come and talk to your, do you have a HOA?
Well, actually, people have, there's like tree wars going on where I live, and people have been fined. You know, someone who loves trees will report the people that cut the trees down.
Okay, yes.
And a lot of people are not talking to each other.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't like that because, you know, trees are supposed to bring us all together and, you know, who doesn't love a tree? But if you've seen the devastation, we all, you know, if you've lived here even only 3 years now, you could have moved here as recently as 3 years ago and seen pretty significant damage from hurricanes.
I'm in Lake County, and actually they're talking about removing their restrictions about cutting trees down, because I guess it's a pain in the neck with the enforcement part of it.
Yes, yes, and with any ordinance or charter, the words are meaningless, even though you can feel satisfied that you changed the words, and that's supposed to be how things work, but if there is no enforcement or penalty for violating, then the words are there, but the actions aren't changed. So, okay, I wanted to just talk briefly about tree selection, because you all hopefully have room in your yard for a tree, and I want you to just think about what the space is like where you want to plant a tree, size-wise, sun exposure, drainage, and these, I'm just going to go quickly through these slides to remind you of things that should be decided or recognized before you plant your tree, so that you're sure that you're putting a tree in a site where it's going to thrive. Because if you put a shade-loving tree in full sun, and if you put a tree that needs full sun in the shade, it may not die, but it's not going to thrive. And you want it to thrive. The more they thrive, the more carbon dioxide they're going to take in. Our urban soils can be very challenging, not only to dig a hole for your tree, but also to provide enough porous area for roots to expand outwards. Because most of our tree roots are in the top about 12 to 18 inches of soil. They want to go outwards. That's their growth habit. And compacted soils prevent them from doing that. If you have compacted soils, you may have to prepare a much larger planting area than we'll talk about in just a little bit. So our soils, we want what's on the right. We want earthworms going around and, you know, breaking down organic matter, keeping that soil aerated as opposed to just plates of soil one on top of the other where the roots are just, they're gonna stay very, very close to the surface. They won't get as much, as many nutrients and moisture as they really, really need. As the lower right, you know, what happens when they build? They take away all the dirt and then they bring in whatever they can find to fill back in. So you lose those soil layers, you know, the organic layer, the rich topsoil that really helps things grow better, and you're left with, you know, sand or very poor quality soil. Drainage, our soils are primarily sandy naturally, but if you have soil that was brought in or has been compacted from equipment, then your drainage is going to be poor, and it may not even be a site where you could plant a tree. If it drains okay, you need to choose a tree which is going to be able to tolerate what we call wet feet periodically, where it may actually be in soggy soil as opposed to well-drained soil. You probably are all familiar with plant hardiness zones, yes, okay. The tree characteristics are going to influence what you choose, because if you have a narrow planting area, you need to choose a small tree that's not going to exceed the growing space. Root systems extend, you know, 2, 3, 5 times as wide as the canopy of a tree, so you actually need more room below ground for your tree than you need above ground. If you restrict the growing space of the canopy, you're going to have to do more pruning to keep it from growing into where you don't want it to grow. If you restrict the root space or the growing space of the root system, then you are the anchor roots, which are the roots that are going to hold it in place, can't grow out as far as they need to and anchor the tree as well as you want it to when we have a storm. That phrase, the right tree for the right place, that's what we're hoping here. So think about your site. These are all native trees. The pine is going to prefer a more acidic site, so if you already have azaleas or you know what's growing in your yard is on the more acidic side, the pine would be a good choice. The others will probably, you know, the richer the soil, the more nutrients and organic matter, the better for most trees, but really you want to look at drainage. I don't know enough about the fringe tree to know whether it would want a really well-drained site or not. I'm going to advance.
Well-drained, yeah.
Well-drained, yes.
IVIS says it's good for cities and urban areas, so,
But you don't want it to sit in water.
yeah, it
Yeah.
looks
Okay.
up when Mesic
Okay.
to draw.
And I think most of us have yards where we have pretty good drainage. You might have a lower part or near your swale where the water sits, and that's a place for like a maple, cypress, something that can tolerate the wet conditions. When we plant our tree, we want to dig a hole that's a couple times wider than the root ball. One of the great things about offering smaller trees is it means the size of the hole you have to dig is smaller. But if you have a really compacted soil, you might have to go beyond, the 3 times the size of the root ball recommendation and aerate more of the soil. You see the gentleman is putting the soil he takes out of the hole onto like a tarp, or you can put it in a wheelbarrow or something. That way you have all that soil easily available to put back in the hole. You don't really want to add, you don't want to amend the soil, you don't want to add things, you want to put the same soil back in. If your soil is really poor or compacted, that's where you have, you might want to improve a 10-foot by 10-foot area and then plant your tree. But if you if you only improve the condition right where you're putting the tree in the ground, it's like you're putting it in a slightly bigger pot. Those roots are going to get to the edge of that really lovely soil, and they're going to say, I don't want to go out into that compacted soil, and they're just going to start going round and round and round. And while that may not be necessarily so bad for the feeder roots, those tiny, tiny roots, your anchor roots are not going to go outwards, and your storage roots. So you're growing a tree that is not gonna be very sturdy in the wind.
Actually, Dana, excuse me.
Yes.
That's a good point. When you plant your tree too, you don't wanna wrap your roots, you wanna spread them out so they
Yes.
don't naturally
Yeah,
wrap.
some trees in a pot will develop circling roots,
Mhm.
and you wanna spread those out when you plant the tree. And you can cut, you've got a sharp saw or something to cut, you can cut those roots, yeah, but you want to try to pull them outwards. If you keep them circling, that circling root can actually grow tight against the trunk, and I mentioned the xylem and the phloem. That pressure from that root will actually smash those tubes, and it's like you're girdling the tree because they can no longer function the way that they need to. Figuring out how deep to dig the hole can be a little more challenging because you need to find the topmost root. All trees have root flare. When they're smaller, it can be a little bit harder to figure out where that is, but you should be able to find what's called the topmost lateral root. And that you want really at grade, we call it. Now, nurseries can make it harder for you because when they step up trees to a new pot, instead of putting soil in the bottom of the pot first and then putting that small root ball in, they put the root ball in and then they pile dirt on top. And so you think you're getting a 3-gallon pot with a root ball that's actually the size of a 3-gallon pot, but instead those roots are being covered up with soil and they're not going to grow as well. And it could mean you make the mistake of planting that tree too deeply. So if you see there really isn't any flare in that trunk as it goes into the root ball, so that means the flare is buried. And this next slide shows you that pile of dirt on the left is what they had to take out of the top of the pot to find where the root flare was. This is not uncommon. It's easy when you plant the tree to correct that and be sure that you plant the tree at the right depth. If you're going to err a little bit, planting a little bit too shallow is better because it will sink, and you can also, it's easier to add dirt on top if you need to kind of level things out, the edge of the root ball to the surrounding grade. But if you plant too deeply, you're going to have to lift that tree out, put soil in, kind of guess. So this is not an unusual problem. As you look around town, it's really easy to find trees that were planted too deeply because they will look like a telephone pole going into the ground as opposed to having that flare. And the reason this is bad is that roots need oxygen, and the farther down they are in the soil, especially when they first start growing, the less access to oxygen they have. And when you water your tree, it's going to take longer for that water to get down into the root ball. It may not even get there. It may just adhere to the soil above it. So it's not good. Your tree may not die, but it's not going to thrive. And a tree that's struggling is just not going to give you the benefits that you want. So we put our tree in the hole, and then we're going to start watering it in to settle that soil so that you don't leave huge air pockets, because if roots grow into large air pockets, they're going to start to dry out and die. And sometimes people, before they put the tree in the hole, you see in the upper left, they'll just fill the hole up with water. They're doing a drainage test to see if it goes down pretty quickly, then that's a site that's fairly well drained. If it sits there for a long time, that means you've got some issues with drainage and you may not be able to plant a tree there at all, or you need to be sure that you pick a tree that can tolerate wet conditions like that. So I think in order for everyone to get their tree, it's a little past 8:30. I can keep talking for hours, but
What do you think?
I have a question. Well, could you take a couple questions and then?
Sure,
Okay.
yes.
There's an article in our National Sierra Club magazine, and our national forests are being impacted by the movement of climate change. And it's a big issue is should the National Park Service or the managers intervene. you know, some of these trees could actually go extinct. Have you seen any transition or any invaders, any change in the state of Florida?
Invaders, yes. I think all of the trees, native trees that grow here, are tolerant of, they can tolerate warmer conditions without negative consequences, at least for a couple degrees. What is probably gonna happen is, you know, as the tropical trees that we see only in South Florida, now if we have a general warming, you know, instead of being in zone 9B, we might be in zone 10 here. Yeah, and that's where maybe the temperate trees are not gonna get enough, a long enough cooling period during the winter time to be able to thrive. But many of the trees that grow in Florida have a pretty wide range. You know, cypress, you can find that all the way up to southern Illinois. If you want to choose a seed source that's local, but, you know, there can, I think, we're not seeing that here because we don't really have elevation to deal with, and we're hot already.
Yeah.
So it might have more to do with rising in sea level, saltwater intrusion. Yeah.
Question, we have a water problem in Florida where drainage is a problem and all that. How much water can an average live oak absorb because of the capillary reaction and the root ball and all that? It's way up there, I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, I don't either, but yes, especially during the summertime, trees transpire a lot. They're taking in gallons and gallons of water and then, you know, runs through and is released. So they are amazing machines, but I don't know the rate.
It's over 100 gallons an inch or something like that, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? I know I went through the tree planting and stuff. Did you
I had a
also-
question about the
Yes.
arborists in the city. They're constantly coming in and making the live oaks look like broccoli. Is that a healthy thing,
What
or?
city do, I'm just getting to the, how much
It's a
you
type, you know,
need
the-
to water.
Yeah, I
This
guess-
is your watering cycle for your trees.
I've always kind of debated the arborists about the way they trim a tree, make one single trunk, and then at the very top, they have this pinnacle of what I call the broccoli look of live oaks. So to me, structurally, that seems to be a weaker than what they really want to do, is just let their arms down a little bit.
Yes, sometimes the location requires clearance for pedestrians, for vehicles, and they have to remove those lower limbs because of the
But they seem to
location where the
machine
tree
like, they
is.
don't actually think that much.
It
They give them a
takes,
lot of credit.
I do a pruning class, and pruning is both an art and a science. It takes thought and time to figure out where you're going to prune. And the easy thing is just to top it, because you don't have to make any decisions about which branch to, you know, reduce and which branch to pick off completely. What city do you live in?
Orlando.
Yeah.
City of Orlando just seems, they're butchers. They come in and just whack away to make, every tree up there looks like a piece of broccoli.
Okay, because I mean,
Correct.
Orlando has an urban forester and a,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm sure they do, but